What if I told you that time doesn't heal all wounds? Or that Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief don't apply to every loss? When we look at people around us, it's easy to see differences, but we all have something in common that we can't see. 100% of us have an it, a loss or an unwanted change in our life that's impacted us. And I use the word it to be all-inclusive because there's lots of loss and unwanted change that's just as impactful as the death of someone you love, like a divorce, or losing a close relationship, or a pet, or your job, your financial stability, your health, or your physical ability. What's your it? My first it happened when I was 18 years old, living at home in St. Louis, going to college, working part-time. I'd gone to Stephenville, Texas to see my sister for spring break. On the second night, we decided to go to a party at a lake about 30 minutes away. Halfway there, about 11 o'clock at night, on a deserted 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere, we were hit head-on by a drunk driver. I was in the front passenger seat, and I took the full brunt of the impact. I was trapped in the car, unconscious, critically injured, and my parents back in St. Louis got that 2 a.m. call that no parent wants. Well, I knew my facial injuries were bad, but I didn't know how bad until I saw my dad's face the first time he saw me when he walked through that door. My dad, a 20-year career Marine who'd done 2 tours in Vietnam, and it was the first time that I ever saw him cry. And in a split second, through no fault of my own, my entire life was ruined. I lost my physical appearance, self-confidence, self-esteem. I didn't want to live anymore. Well, over time, my physical injuries were healing, but inside, mentally and emotionally, I was a wreck. Less than 2 years after that car accident, I did what nobody should do with the grief and the mental and emotional challenges that I was struggling with. I made a major life decision and got married. With the exception of my 2 beautiful daughters, that marriage turned out to be just as devastating as the car accident. After enduring 5 years of abuse, I filed for divorce, but the abuse had already taken its toll. I lost what little self-confidence and self-esteem I'd managed to rebuild, as well as my innocence, my sense of safety and security, my future hopes and dreams. I'd made a mess of my life, and so I put guilt and blame and shame on myself too. I was a failure. I had no job, no marketable skills, no education past a high school diploma, no money, and a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old that I had to support. So while raising my daughters as a single mom, I worked a full-time job, 2 part-time jobs, and went back to college. Well, my life was turning out better than I could have expected. Within 12 years after my divorce, I had 2 happy, healthy teenagers, completed a bachelor's degree and an MBA, established a successful career, and had a dream job as the CEO of a large company. Life was good. And then I met Keith, and life turned into spectacular. Given what we'd each been through before we met, we truly believed that it was finally our turn for a happily ever after. But that didn't last very long. Less than 2 years into our marriage, another it happened. Keith had a motocross accident, and he was found unconscious on the track, critically injured, and paralyzed from the waist down. And our life together changed dramatically. It wasn't the happily ever after that we'd envisioned. 4 years after Keith's accident, another it happened. Keith took his own life, and in a split second, my entire world shattered again. And here's the thing. After every loss, even though each one of them were very different, the same 5 stages of grief were shared with me with the message that I needed to go through these stages in order to heal. But the problem was they didn't fit what I was feeling. What many people don't know is those 5 stages were originally intended to identify the emotions people with a terminal illness have when facing their own death, with if something's going to happen in the future. But in it, whether it was days, months, or years ago, has already happened, and it is always in the past. Coming to terms with the future loss of your life is very different than processing a loss in your life and facing an uncertain future, which is why these stages didn't work for me. I needed something different, but there was nothing else that existed that I could relate to. And time was passing, but I wasn't doing any better with that lack of self-confidence or the guilt or the grief. Because feelings and emotions aren't wounds to be healed. I'm always going to have feelings and emotions about my it. But here's what did work for me. Through this series of its throughout my life, I discovered a framework and 5 realizations that I can use to process any loss or unwanted change in a productive way. Integrate that loss into my life, learning from it, and using what I learned to my advantage going forward, which is I'm so passionate to share this framework and these realizations with you. The first piece of the framework is relive. Do you remember cassette tapes? That's what relive feels like. Play, rewind, repeat, over and over again on this continuous loop. When an it happens, that's what many of us do. We relive it in at least one of 2 ways. Mentally, thinking about it nonstop, forward and backward in endless detail. And verbally, talking about it, telling stories to anyone who will listen, and sometimes the same story over and over again. Keeping us in this exhausting, dizzying loop that we perpetuate by asking questions that have no answer and usually begin with the word why. And then being a crystal ball reader with our what ifs and our if onlys, leading us to these self-defeating thoughts and beliefs that my life is ruined. This is as good as my life is ever going to get. Well, it's necessary to spend time and relive because that's where our mind first starts to process and make sense of what happened. But if we stay there too long, it actually becomes unproductive because those thoughts become so familiar, so routine, so comfortable that we create this mental channel, this mental rut, and we can get stuck there. And staying in relive at some point in time makes other people uncomfortable. So I started to put on a happy face and pretend to make them feel better, but it only made me feel worse. I learned that my process and my timeline needs to be my own. The realization in relive is putting yourself first isn't selfish, it's survival. The second piece of the framework is reflect. When something unexpected happens, many of us first thoughts go to a worst case scenario. Like when my boss wants to meet with me late on a Friday afternoon, I'm not thinking that it's good news. Or my daughter who's 2 hours late and I haven't heard from her. My first thoughts are not, she's fine, she's having fun. We're all hardwired for this negative bias thinking. And if we never question or challenge those thoughts, that's where we'll stay. In reflect, I learned to take a step back and consider, is there any other way to see my loss? Well, this is really hard for me because I am very stubborn and I can dig in and hold really tightly what I believe and look for things to prove myself right. But this forces me to be resigned into believing this is as good as my life will get. I'll never feel any differently. And I'm also from the show me state, so I have to see something for myself to believe it. The best example that hit me in reflect was writing the number 6 on a piece of paper, sliding it across the table and asking someone else what they saw. My 6 was their 9. The powerful realization in reflect is there's more than one true or right way to see the exact same thing. Other ways are just beyond what we currently believe. The third piece is reframe. Artists spend a lot of time choosing a frame to go around their picture because they know how impactful that frame is to how you're going to see and feel about their picture. This concept is so important that there's a theory called the framing theory, which says how information is presented to an audience influences the way they process that information. Well, companies use this theory all the time to influence us for their products and services. Media uses this theory all the time to influence our views and beliefs. Well, guess what? We can use this same theory for the it's in our life. Conventional wisdom led me to believe that my loss and those feelings that I had were one and the same, a package deal that could never be separated. But I learned that living with my loss, my it, and living in those feelings of grief were two different things, and they can be separated. We can think of our loss like a picture, a snapshot in time that will never change, and our thoughts and beliefs as the frame around that picture. When I started to look at my loss this way, I'd done a really good job of putting a make me feel awful frame around my loss with no facts or ability to prove that my life was ruined. This is the way I'm always going to feel. There were other thoughts and beliefs that could be just as right or just as true. Like maybe there's something good can come out of this. Maybe there's something I can learn. Or maybe there's something that I can use to help someone else. Well, if one frame makes me feel so awful, and another frame makes me feel hopeful and purposeful and better, why would I choose the frame that makes me feel so bad? The realization and reframe, when you change the frame around it, you change, and you change at the core, because every time you reframe something, you rewire your brain a little bit more away from that negative thinking. The fourth piece of the framework is reconnect. Lots of things change when it happens, but there's one thing that never changes. We all, at our core, have a need to belong, a need to be wanted, and more than anything else, a need to be connected. Have you ever gone back to get your cell phone when you recognized you didn't have it with you? We don't want to be disconnected. But when it happens, we do the exact opposite of what we innately want and need. When I'm disconnected, I have no passion, no purpose, no energy, no reason to get up in the morning. After the car accident, I withdrew and isolated myself, refusing to see or talk to anybody. Well, thankfully, a few months after my car accident, a good friend of mine eventually got fed up. He came over unannounced, picked me up off the floor, carried me outside, put me on the back of his motorcycle, and took off. We talked for hours about how driving a car is kind of like life. Sometimes you go exactly to where you want to go. Sometimes you take a detour. Sometimes you get lost. What he did in this seemingly mindless conversation reconnected me. Physically, touching me when he picked me up. Mentally, by engaging me in a conversation that gave my mind a break. And emotionally, by accepting me exactly how I was, where I was, facial scars and all. And I learned that there's a big difference between existing fogging a mirror and living. And the reality is, the longer I stayed isolated, the worse and more disconnected I felt. The realization and reconnect, I'm not alone. To do more than just exist, I need life in my life. The fifth piece of the framework is release. As humans, we have this strong need for control, and it starts at an early age. Have you ever seen a child refuse to eat something? For my daughter, it was lima beans. She had total control. And as we get older, this need gets stronger. 1 minute, I'm laughing, having fun on my way to a party at a lake, and the next, my entire life has changed forever. And I felt this overwhelming sense of this loss of control of everything all at once. And I needed control over something, anything. Well, one of the things I could exert control over was my mind. And I'd done a really good job of using it against myself, making up these different outcomes, convincing myself that I could have or should have been able to change or prevent what happened. Putting these totally unrealistic expectations on myself, making me feel more guilt and blame and shame. Well, as long as I hold on to this illusion of control of the outcome, that illusion has control over me. And the reality is, one of the things we have the least amount of control over is an outcome when there's at least one other person involved. And holding on to this illusion is mentally and emotionally draining. The realization and release, letting go of the illusion of control of the outcome, sets you free from that guilt and blame and shame, giving you back energy and bandwidth to focus on the things that you can control and change in the future. I'm passionate about sharing this framework and these realizations because they worked for me, and anybody can use them. Your it doesn't have to be a near-fatal car accident or an abusive marriage or the death of someone you loved. And you can start using them right now, right where you are, no matter how long ago your it happened. Now, even though they might seem like a checklist, they're not. There's no specific order and no timeline. You can bounce around in and out of the pieces and sometimes be in more than one at the same time. The diamond-shaped framework is intentional. Ironically, a diamond, which is highly sought after, and grief that no one wants, share a lot of the same characteristics. Both occur naturally, created with stress and pressure, known for their hardness. There are no two alike, and they can't be exactly duplicated. Both are heavier to carry and have limited value in their initial state. Their value is created by processing them. Just like we mine diamonds from the earth, we can mine valuable things in life, personal diamonds, like self-confidence and determination and resilience, out of the rough stuff of life. With every it, we have choices. We can quit, we can carry around that heavy shit, or we can build grit. What will your choice be? Thank you.